Hi everybody, welcome along to another episode of the Dispatches podcast. My name is Brendan Malone. It is great to be back with you again. And today's episode was originally going to be titled, You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So just do. But then, as you can see, I decided to actually go with a slightly different title. The reason why I was contemplating that title originally, though, was because we're going to talk about an article that has just been published in the last day. And it's actually 2 days ago now, but it's a very recent article, and it is an attack riddled with all sorts of misinformation on New Zealand pro-lifers who are doing their best to try and actually care and support women. And as you'll see as we unpack this article, it really is a case of you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. There's a shell game basically that's being created here. And the shell game works like this. If you oppose abortion, you have a moral uncomfortability about it, a moral opposition to what's going on, then you are told that you are not caring. When you step up and you care, you are told that your care is not sincere, that it's fake, that it's manipulation. And so basically, it's a shell game. You can't win this game. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And that's exactly what's going on here. And really, the end result of all of this is this radical pro-abortion choice activism, which only allows, and will not brook any dissent, it only allows people one option on the table, and that is abortion. That's clearly what you see from this particular article. Now, this article was published by an organisation called the International Socialist Organisation New Zealand. I think they're actually called the International Socialist Organisation Aotearoa. And as the name clearly indicates, they are a committed communist and revolutionary group. They don't shy away from that. Now, before we jump into the actual contents of the article itself, I just want to take a look at one more important aspect of the story, and that is what happened when this international, locally based but international affiliated communist group here in New Zealand, a self-described revolutionary socialist group, when they published this article, here's the response they got from ALRANZ. Now, ALRANZ is the Abortion Law Reform Association of New Zealand. Here's what they had to say, and this is really telling for a couple of reasons. Thank you for the interview. They were interviewed, as you'll find out in just a second in the article. We have so much to say about predatory crisis pregnancy centres in Aotearoa, New Zealand. All of them are predatory. So they've really nailed their colours to the mast here in a couple of ways. Number one, they are absolutely in bed here with a militant, self-described, revolutionary communist organisation with international ties. And that will become quite ironic in just a moment when we dive into the actual content and accusations that are being made in this article. Secondly, they are claiming here that all crisis pregnancy care centres are predatory. Like I said, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You are accused of not being caring if you don't support abortion. When you refuse to support abortion and then you step up and you provide genuine care and love and support to women, you are still attacked by these groups. And they are claiming here, as I said, this is an extreme position, that all of these organisations which provide care and support and assistance to women, they are all predatory. And just so we're clear here about exactly who the International Socialist Organisation Aotearoa is, just in case anybody thinks that I'm being unfair here in my description of them as a radical revolutionary communist group. This is the very group that ALRANZ have aligned themselves to. For those who don't know, ALRANZ is considered somewhat of an authority in the media. They are regularly quoted, they are referenced, and they are sought after as a mainstream media source. And as you'll see in the article that we're about to read, they have far too much sway and power in the Ministry of Health. And that organisation, ALRANZ, has aligned itself with this particular group. Let's get a clearer insight into who they are by taking a look at their website. And you'll see here, this is literally the homepage in all of its glory. And the very first article there at the top of the page, The Lost Decade of Revolutions. Again, unflinching in what they are calling here. Like they are a revolutionary organisation. There's just no getting away from that fact. Secondly, there's an old saying, a picture paints 1,000 words. And that is the picture that represents this organisation. And you can quite clearly see, if we sort of close in on that picture there, that this does not represent a mainstream peaceful protest. This is something else altogether. The imagery here would indicate violent revolutionary behaviours. And this is the organisation that ALRANZ has aligned itself to. This is the group that has posted this article, and this is the article that is being shared amongst New Zealand healthcare workers. So let's get to the rub of the issue, and let's have a look at the claims that are made in this article, and let's read together now through this particular article called What's the Deal with Crisis Pregnancy Centres by Romani Taska, Poland, and it was published on the 2nd of November. International Socialist Organisation writer Romani Taska, Poland, talks to ALRANZ co-president Alma Deander about the misleading anti-abortion organisations springing up around the country. Abortion Law Reform Association of New Zealand was founded in 1973 to advocate for the decriminalisation of abortion. Since this goal was achieved in 2020, ALRANZ has continued to act as a watchdog, advocating for increased access while keeping an eye on anti-abortion forces in Aotearoa. So they're not just groups, they're forces. This whole thing lacks any perspective at all. You're talking here about a movement that is predominantly, like the pro-life movement, predominantly led and populated, particularly in the caring space, by women. And they are being described as forces, like there's some sort of military and violent sort of movement here, which is kind of ironic because, think about the source and consider the photograph we've just seen. Alma Deander is the current co-president of ALRANZ, along with Ella Shepherd. She spoke to me about one concerning trend in anti-abortion agitation. So now it's being described as agitation. This is people providing care. You see the shell game here and the diabolical nature of this awful. This is beyond like just basic propaganda here. This is toxic. It is unjust and it is just outright lying. So you refer to caring for women in need as a form of agitation. That says a lot more that is problematic about you, if you were choosing to use that kind of phrasing, than it does about the people who are doing the caring. The proliferation of crisis pregnancy centres, and they put that in scare quotes because obviously they just refuse to accept that that's what these organisations do, provide help to women who are in crisis pregnancy. Alma has a lot to say about CPCs. Long story short, they are dangerous, misleading, and have flown under the radar for too long. So in other words, you've got lies being told here, you've got scaremongering, and you've clearly got an attempt at agitating for some sort of state control and punitive measures to be levelled against pro-lifers who are simply providing care for women in need. Like I said earlier, you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't with these people, so you may as well just do what is good, true and beautiful and forget about their madness. What are crisis pregnancy centres? Essentially, they are anti-choice organisations that masquerade as sources of information and support for pregnant people. Like, this is a bold claim, but they don't present any evidence at all to back up this claim that this is a masquerade, that it's a charade, that it's all false. They just throw all these claims out there. This is just toxic, venomous venting, basically, in a nutshell, with no substantive basis backing it up at all. They are usually fundamentalist Christian or Catholic, and operate as charities. So when you say fundamentalist Christian, you mean like they're really committed to the fundamentals of loving your neighbour, just like Jesus called us to do. And if that's what is being considered a fundamentalist Christian now, then count me in, because that's a beautiful vision. I want to live in a world where people truly love their neighbour like these people do. It's a good thing. And they operate as charities, offering some form of charitable assistance. They are maybe giving them some nappies and baby stuff, Alma says. On the face of it, that's great. But when you actually check out their websites and look at their views, they are anti-abortion. So first of all, what's the problem with that? They are providing care. It doesn't matter what their views are. Surely this is the whole point. Like I said, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. This is just satanic, basically. This is a total black hole. It's an ideological black hole. It's typical of communists, by the way. You can't agree, because if you agree, you're a bad person, and if you disagree, you're also a bad person. You've just got to do whatever arbitrary thing they want you to do. So on the one hand, when you say, I am pro-life, they say, oh, you don't like women, which is obviously not true. And when have you cared for women? And then when pro-lifers step up and do care for the woman, and they are the ones, make no mistake about it, it's not pro-choicers who are running this kind of support network for women. They're just not. It's pro-lifers who are pouring blood, sweat and tears into this. And when you do step up and do this, they accuse you of this kind of stuff. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And the whole thing here is, the problem here is these people are anti-abortion. So what? It's irrelevant. You're pro-abortion. That motivates you to say things that are obviously clearly untrue and hostile to other people in our country and sowing all this division amongst ordinary Kiwis. It's not a good thing. And as I said, at the level of our healthcare workers in this country. Now, they are doing more than giving some nappies and baby stuff. So she says they are maybe giving them some nappies and baby stuff. I mean, talk about misinformation. We are talking about organisations that are doing things like doing house repairs for women in need so they don't get financially burdened. They are providing things like washing machines to these women. They are paying bills for women in need. They're doing all sorts of stuff that puts this organisation, which is just sort of venting and spewing venom at other people in the country, it puts them to shame. When was the last time you did anything even remotely like that for women? The simple truth is this organisation, ALRANZ, doesn't do that kind of stuff. Rather than simply offering neutral, practical advice, like, in other words, if you're pro-abortion, you don't offer biased advice. This is an absurdity. Everyone is biased about this issue. You have bias of some kind or other. The question is not, are you biased? Because we are all biased. The question is your bias good, true, and beautiful or not? And the pro-lifers would argue, and I'm one of them, that our bias, our pro-life bias, is absolutely good, true, beautiful. It is logically consistent. It is the most humane position to adopt, and that's why we are pro-lifers. Rather than simply offering neutral, practical advice, Alma says these centres use lies and coercion tactics to basically convince people not to have an abortion. Again, no evidence is presented, Freudian slip. No evidence is presented to back up this very extreme divisive claim. This is misinformation, which is rather ironic. You'll see in a minute. CPCs are connected to broader anti-abortion groups in New Zealand, such as Family First New Zealand and Voice for Life, which in turn have connections and receive funding from international anti-abortion organisations such as Heartbeat International. Now, I can't speak for all groups, but I can tell you for a fact that Voice for Life New Zealand is not receiving a single red cent from any foreign organisation, and I don't believe Family First is either. In fact, I don't know of any organisation in New Zealand that is receiving foreign money. This is a typical trope. Again, this is misinformation, and it's also ironic. Here's the ironic bit. Alma Deander, the lady who is making this claim here, she comes to New Zealand all the way from America. She's not a Kiwi. She did her study in America. She worked for Planned Parenthood in America. And now she's here as the head of ALRANZ. So if you want to talk about foreign interference in New Zealand, perhaps, and I don't want to unnecessarily cast aspersions, but perhaps, since this has been put out there and the accusation has been made, and apparently we're supposed to be concerned about this, perhaps ALRANZ would like to lead the way by cutting ties with anybody outside of the country who has a background and a connection with massive organisations, multi-million-dollar organisations who profit off the back of abortion, like Planned Parenthood, because that's the connection that they now have. And this woman who is saying these people are receiving foreign money. In other words, there's some sort of foreign interference here in New Zealand, which, as I said, is just not even true. The first danger of CPCs is that they spread lies. Again, she's just made this claim, no evidence presented whatsoever. The second is that they spread shame. Another bold claim, no evidence whatsoever presented for this one either. Anti-abortion groups really are the original disinformation groups. Well, I mean, the only way that this could be true is if, first of all, you believe it's true, and secondly, human history only began about 50 or 60 years ago. But clearly that's not true. Disinformation, ironically, the beginnings of disinformation, the real grandpappies of disinformation who turn it into a science and an art form are none other than the socialists, the communists, who actually created an entire mechanism of disinformation, which is just, as I said, it's ironic that this is the very group promoting this misinformation. Secondly, if you want to talk about in the modern context, who was the original disinformation groups, well, I think it would not be unreasonable to actually ask questions of the pro-abortion activist groups who consistently made claims that were just not, and they still do. They use all sorts of slogans that are just false. They repeat claims that are just untrue about abortion, about life in the womb, and about pro-life groups. And here's a classic example of it. And she's just falling back into a pattern of behavior that's very normative for them. So it's, as I said, it's ironic. They're accusing others of the very thing that they're doing. This is projection. It's gaslighting and it's projection. Alma says CPC spread disinformation about the nature, side effects, and long-term impacts of abortion. Again, no evidence is cited of what these specific claims might actually be. She just says this. And this is the problem. If you're not dealing with specifics, this is all just vague. It's unsubstantive. It's generalization. It has no real merit or substance. As well as being misled, if you disclose you are seeking an abortion at a CPC, you risk being shamed, told that you are already a mum and urged not to kill your baby. Again, she's quoting this as if somehow she's quoting someone saying this. Well, then who is the person? Who is the group you're referring to there? But secondly, the irony here is just, it's replete with irony, because this is a biological reality, and I know pro-abortion choice activists find this really uncomfortable, but it is reality, and it's inescapable, it is truth, and it is not going to cease to be true just because you find it uncomfortable. The truth is that the only people who actually need to seek out abortions are mothers. You have to first be pregnant in order to have an abortion, and if you are a pregnant woman, then obviously you are a mother. You are the mother of your own offspring. Your unborn child is growing within you. So you are a mother. And what makes this dishonesty here that she's engaged in all the more obscene is the fact that despite basically saying that women shouldn't consider themselves mothers on this side of the abortion question, those same women are left to deal with the ramifications of that reality if they go through with an abortion. ALRANZ is not there to pick up the pieces once they go into the abortion clinic after not being well cared for, not being given all of the information, and not being well supported in a overwhelming number of cases. They have the abortion, and then after the child has been lost to them at the hands of the abortionist, then they discover the full gravity of that truth of what it means that they were a mother. And they are now, it's not like they have suddenly ceased to be a mother, they are now the mother of a dead unborn child. And that's horrific. And that reality is left with them. And so this is not a caring approach at all. It actually burdens women with all sorts of unnecessary burdens. And sadly, it's very typical of this kind of militancy that we see from this group. Even the support, again in scare quotes, like it's not real, offered is not necessarily as benevolent as it first appears. Alma explains that CPCs target young people and people in low socioeconomic areas with vague and coercive promises of financial support. No, there's nothing vague and coercive at all. They are literally no strings attached promises, and they're not vague. I have worked for organizations and I have seen the checks and the work that has been done, the support that has been offered to women in need. It is astounding what is going on in this country amongst these organisations who, on a shoestring budget with very little funding or support, they don't have the official mechanism, the state backing them, the amount of care and the hours of care and support that they are providing to women in need. It really is a beautiful thing to witness. And so to have someone here just saying, oh, it's vague and it's coercive, it's just a nonsense. It's actually quite obscene, really, because the work that these people are doing, it is humanitarianism on a whole nother level. In fact, one organization that I previously worked for, they had a reputation amongst state, like official institutional carers. This particular group was known as the group that you would go to with the hard cases, where basically the state sort of hit a brick wall, reached its limit, and didn't really know what else to do. they knew that if you had cases that went beyond the 9 to 5, if you had the cases that were really tough and really demanding, you would go to the pro-life crisis pregnancy centre because they would actually care, and they were not constrained. They didn't stop at 5 p.m. and walk away. They gave and they gave and they gave, and these other organisations had a huge respect for them because they knew that they would step up and care and meet needs that they were just not capable of meeting as the official organisation. So to have someone describing them in this way is really quite obscene. And it's also quite ironic because she has previously worked for Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, I don't know if it's still the case, but previously they had the overwhelming majority of their for-profit abortion facilities located within low socioeconomic Black and Hispanic areas. And this is exactly what gave rise to the accusation that they were involved in, or continuing the eugenic legacy of their founder, Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenist. Don't worry, I'll do a future episode because I'm sure some of you might be sort of maybe scratching your heads a little bit and saying, really, they were founded by a eugenist? Yes, they were, and we'll talk a bit more about that maybe on a future episode. But the accusation arose more recently, in recent decades, that they were carrying this on now in a far more brutal way, because Margaret Sanger's eugenics was initially about controlling and trying to weed out the unfit, so preventing them from giving birth. And it was about contraception and the typical eugenic notion of sterilisation and stuff like that. And so what has happened in recent decades is you have groups that are accusing them of actually being eugenic in a violent way in using abortion as the tool for that eugenic purpose, because they've got so many of their abortion facilities located in poor Hispanic and Black neighbourhoods. In fact, a lot of people don't realise this, but speaking of socialist organisations and revolutionary-minded groups, the Black Panthers in America originally opposed Planned Parenthood because they were opposed to both abortion and contraception. They viewed them as an imperialist sort of attempt to control their population. CPCs engage in a wide range of dubious behaviour. Gianna's Choice, a CPC based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, has at least 2 ultrasound machines which Alma notes many GPs' offices would be jealous of. Okay, so first of all, I know how this came to be. And I can tell you right now that they fundraise their backsides off to raise money. This is what pro-lifers do. They care. And they put their money where their mouth is. And the fact that GPs' offices would be jealous of them, I'm not so sure about that, but let's say they would be jealous of them, is an indication of what? A government that is not prioritising maternal health and the well-being of pregnant women and couples and families like they should be. That's not a blight on this pregnancy centre. It's a blight on the state, who is absolutely occupied now by a very, and at times very militant, but a very strong pro-abortion choice ideology. And so maybe it's worth asking the question, how did we end up in this situation where our healthcare providers are not actually being provided the tools they need to help women in these situations, pregnant women, as best they can. And meanwhile, lay people have to raise funds off their own backs in order to pay for these kinds of things. The problem, says Alma, is you're not guaranteed that a trained sonographer will give you that scan. In their own newsletter, Gianna's Choice has advertised ultrasound training sessions run by midwives. Appropriately trained midwives can do scans, but they are not supposed to train others. Okay? And if that is actually what is going on here, then it seems to me that there are legitimate questions that can be explored around that. But let's also be clear about the fact, and I believe this is still the case, it certainly used to be, that Gianna's Choice is very upfront with everyone that this is not an official medical scan that you are undergoing if you experience an ultrasound in one of their facilities or through their organisation. So the claim here originally was that this was dubious behaviour, this was deceptive, but they don't try and go beyond their brief. They don't try and pretend that somehow they are, a qualified medical diagnostic organisation. That's not what they're doing at all. So, yeah, as I said, if this is the best complaint you've got, things really aren't as bad. According to Alma, the risk is not only that you have someone unqualified giving you the scan, it is that they are possibly going to lie to you and say that you are further along than you are, or shame you, calling the embryo or fetus a baby and making you listen to the heartbeat, which is not really a heartbeat. I mean, there's so much embroiled in that. Why would it be a problem for a mother to actually see her unborn child in this way with an ultrasound technology? The only reason that I can really see for such strong resistance is that there is a ideological propagandistic concern here. And the fear is that women will actually see the reality, and not just women, but probably their partners, their families will see the reality of life in the womb, maybe some of them for the first time. And that starts to pose a very serious problem for the reality of what abortion is. It's a very violent end to the life of a human being who is in a womb. And then she goes on to claim that they will call the embryo or the fetus a baby and make you listen to the heartbeat, which is not really a heartbeat. So apparently it's not a baby. When you have a baby shower, that's not really an unborn baby inside you. I'd love to know what they think it actually is. Making you listen to the heartbeat, that apparently is not really a heartbeat. This is so absurd. It absolutely is a heartbeat. And again, this is one of the problems for the militant pro-abortion choice activist groups like this, is that they engage in disinformation. It is absolutely a heartbeat. The heart is possessed, shall we say, by the unborn child. It's their heart. It's not the mother's heart that is beating, and it is beating. And so to turn around and say, oh no, this is not really a heartbeat, well, please enlighten us exactly what you believe this to be. What is that organ that is being listened to there that has a measurable rhythm like any other human heart does, and which we can see and hear on a screen? Tell me what it is. If it's not a heartbeat, what exactly is it? Again, the irony after accusing pro-lifers of disinformation. Among the most dangerous lies potentially being spread throughout crisis pregnancy centres is abortion reversal. This concept originated in San Diego, where a doctor began claiming that a medical abortion could be reversed with a large dose of progesterone. He was forced to stop, explains Alma, because 1, it's unethical, and 2, pregnant people were hemorrhaging and having to go to hospital. Well, I'm not even sure what she's referring to here, because in actual fact, like I've talked about this on a previous episode where we talked about the recent claim that was made here in New Zealand that somehow this was a dangerous and unethical thing to do. For those who don't know, the abortion pill, which is the one that can be reversed, involves a 2-stage process. You take pill number 1 and then pill number 2. And if you actually get medical intervention for a woman who changes her mind, which surely she's entitled to do, and as a pro-choice organisation, like surely you've got to support that. Otherwise, you're deceiving the public yet again by claiming to be something that you're not. So if you're pro-choice, a woman changes her mind between stage 1 and stage 2, and she says, I want to do everything I can to give my baby a fighting chance, she can go to a doctor and progesterone is given, and that reduces the risk of her losing her baby. Now, before people freak out about this, we need to just look at the facts of the situation. So I'm not sure what she's referring to, first of all, when she says that pregnant people were hemorrhaging and having to go to hospital. I have a feeling she could be referring to a study, which I talked about in a previous episode, that was abandoned. It wasn't even completed. The study was incomplete. And the study sample size was tiny. And as I said, it was incomplete. So you've got no usable results from the study. And 3 people had to go into hospital for care. 2 of the 3 people who hemorrhaged were not even using the progesterone. They were in the control group who had the abortion pill, but no progesterone. So if that's what she's referring to, this isn't just misinformation. It is completely unscientific. There's no scientific backing for what she's saying here. If she's referring to something else that I have not heard about, well, that's a different story. But I have a feeling that's what she might be referring to, and she sort of just mashed up a few stories here. And secondly, progesterone is being used in all sorts of other places in this country. Just so we're clear here, it's not illegal in New Zealand to use medications for off-label purposes. You can use them for off-label, as I understand the law. I've gone and double-checked the law. You can use them off-label as long as you have informed consent from the patient. So as long as they are aware of that fact, then, and obviously, you wouldn't be doing anything dangerous like overdosing a patient, then there doesn't seem to be any legal prevention or prohibition in New Zealand against using a medication which is considered safe in other areas for an off-label purpose. Now, progesterone itself is being used for people who want to change their gender identity and who are looking for medical intervention. Not just that, but this is the really important one. Progesterone is the very medication that is used when women are at greater risk of a miscarriage. And so here we are, we have this leader of a militant pro-abortion group telling us that the very medication which is used to try and help women keep their babies and prevent miscarriage is not actually safe and shouldn't be used when women who have started the 2-stage abortion pill process want exactly that outcome. They want to reduce the risk of the child being lost, and they want to increase the chances of keeping their baby and carrying it to term so it can survive. That's the very purpose of what progesterone is used for in this country. So to turn around now and say, well, no, it's not, and it shouldn't be used for that particular reason in this case, it beggars belief. It defies all explanation. Basically, you're at the point now where you really are in an Orwellian sort of black hole where you're just making stuff up on the fly that is not consistent. There's no consistency in any of this. Like I said earlier, the only choice here is the pro-abortion choice. And if you don't choose that, then you're a bad person, you're wrong. And it doesn't matter what they have to say. It just seems they'll say anything to try and convince you that you're wrong. The Academy of Gynecologists and Obstetrics in the USA issued a statement against this practice, and at the prompting of ALRANZ, which is an interesting fact that I was not aware of until this point, so has the New Zealand Ministry of Health Te Whatu Ora. Now, this is important to understand. A militant pro-abortion organisation aligned with an overt revolutionary activist group that is communist has said here that they were the ones who got the New Zealand Ministry of Health to issue or to try and issue a ban which threatens people with jail time or a fine for even recommending the abortion pill reversal. How the heck is that acceptable practice in anyone's books? It doesn't matter what side of the ledger you're on. How the heck is an activist organisation dictating public policy around healthcare like this? This is insane. What legitimate authority do they have in this space to actually be forcing the Ministry of Health to do this? And why did the Ministry of Health do this? This is a major failure in their basic duty of care. They have neglected, I would suggest, their fundamental duty of care by just listening to an activist organisation in this situation. But like I said, here's the key bit. When you go and look at the New Zealand law, it's not even clear how this policy is even enforceable. First of all, it didn't come from our politicians. Our parliament didn't change the law. A group of policymakers at the lower level, who I'm not sure where they think they have the authority to do this, basically have introduced a legal prohibition that involves a threat of jail time or fines, so, criminal prosecution, for people doing something that our existing laws don't appear to ban. Our existing laws actually appear to allow doctors to do this, to prescribe off-label medications as long as their informed and consent is involved in the process. So how did this even happen? How's this going on? This is so frightening. When you want to talk about ideological capture, and if we want to have a serious conversation about healthcare and healthcare provision, then this is the conversation that we need to be having. Instead of allowing militant pro-abortion revolutionary groups to target caring people who are actually caring for women in need off their own back and who are offering their help and support and are offering genuine options to women who are otherwise stuck in situations where they don't have that kind of support and the options are not there for them. Concerningly, at least 2 CPCs are claiming that they know a GP who will prescribe this progesterone. ALRANZ has already identified one doctor who claimed to provide this treatment, which has been reported to the Medical Council. Okay, great. This is what they're on about. It's not about choice. It's about claims that don't have any scientific backing. They're not substantive. This process is being used overseas. There is no indication that it is dangerous. There has been some ideologically motivated scaremongering. These doctors are not doing anything, as far as we can see, that is contrary to New Zealand law. So what will be fascinating is to see what happens if there is any follow-up. If the Medical Council doesn't follow up, that could be an indication that they know they don't have a good legal leg to stand on. If they do, this could well end up with a very embarrassing court case for ALRANZ and those at the Ministry of Health who actually embarked on this folly in the first place. Countering CPCs is difficult. They are set up as charities and they are doing charitable things, so it's hard for us to do anything about it unless we can prove that they've harmed or deceived someone. So this is a fascinating admission here. So after telling us that they're dangerous, they're lying, they're harmful, she then turns around and admits it's hard for them to prove that they've harmed or deceived anyone. You know why it's hard to prove that? I'll tell you why. Because that's not what they're doing. They're helping people. And every sane, rational Kiwi who's not caught up in revolutionary communism can actually see that this is just a diabolical lie. It's divisive. It's an attack on good people who are caring for women in need. And when you look at the actual facts on the ground and you go to these centres, what do you see? They're providing help. They're providing support. That's why you can't back up any of these claims that you are making. This is absolutely astounding. Remember, this was shared to our healthcare workers union group in this country. This is being shared amongst our healthcare workers as if somehow this is legitimate. There's no questioning, there's no scrutiny, there's no discernment about what's being said here. A crucial first step is identifying these centres and calling them out for the insidious anti-abortion spaces they really are. So it's not permissible now to actually have any space in New Zealand that is not pro-abortion? Does everyone have to submit to the pro-abortion ideology? I thought this was supposed to be pro-choice, so we could choose for ourselves. We could engage our reason, our humanitarian hearts, we could weigh the evidence, we could look at the situation, and we could come to our own decision about this, and then we could act accordingly, according to our own conscience. But when I read this sounds like, no, you're not allowed to do that. You will subject yourselves to the will of the revolutionary communist pro-abortion movement. Otherwise, we will come for you and punish you. And we have such weak policymakers, it seems, in some places, that we actually have control of them. And we are pulling them like puppeteers, operating a marionette. And we are using them to do our bidding. We have the power of the state at our disposal. Does this sound democratic? Does this sound good? Does this sound like the sort of thing that should be happening in a free and open and humane society? If you're like me, you're going to say, no, this doesn't sound good at all. According to Alma, there is room for grassroots organising to do just that. So watch this space. So in other words, they are going to get into their revolutionary activist groups and they are going to start targeting now organisations that care for women. Like I said, you are damned if you do, you are damned if you don't. These people are proving here that they will damn you simply because you don't accept their damnable ideology. Yeah, I've used a lot of damns there, but you get the point. It's as clear as day. If you don't submit to their will, then they will come for you and they will punish you. They're not pro-choice, not even slightly pro-choice. You have to be pro-abortion. And if you provide care and you actually do what they accuse you of not doing, which is step up and provide care for women in need and offer them genuine viable alternatives, because by the way, one of the greatest tragedies would be if these centres were corrupted or destroyed or removed. Then no one would be doing this work because it's not pro-choices. ALRANZ ain't doing this work. So what happens is you step up and you do the very thing they accuse pro-lifers of not doing, which has never been true. This is one of the great points of disinformation that has been pumped out of the pro-abortion groups like ALRANZ for decades now, and it has always been false. And when you step up and you provide that care, then they come for you and they target you. Because why? You're threatening abortion. It's abortion they care about. It's not really woman. It's not a choice. It's abortion. And this just proves it. There's no other way to understand and recognise what's going on here. This is a total, unflinching, absolute commitment to a pro-abortion ideology and a pro-abortion world that they want to build, where you are not allowed to do or be anything else. And so this is the fruit of decades of misinformation and disinformation, and now it's also come on the back of a very extreme abortion law that exists in this country. Now, one of the things that they didn't mention, ironically, they've talked about the abortion pill and they've made these claims about abortion reversals. There's not even any questioning of what's being said here. But the one thing that hasn't been talked about, maybe they don't know enough, or maybe conveniently they just don't want to talk about it, is the fact that the latest abortion report shows us that in the last couple of years since the passing of the Extreme Abortion Legislation Act 2020, and on the back of that, this 0800 DIY dial-in abortion service where they will send you the abortion pills to carry out what, for all intents and purposes, seems to be a state-sanctioned and facilitated backstreet abortion, which I always thought these things were dangerous and we weren't supposed to be doing this, but apparently they've set up a system to actually facilitate that very thing now. And on the back of that now, the majority of abortions taking place in this country each year involve the abortion pill. And since that has become the norm, what we've seen now in the last few years is an almost doubling of the number of abortions that end in adverse effects for women. The number of abortions ending in adverse effects for women has almost doubled in the last couple of years. And when you look at the data, as we're about to do in a second, it is abundantly clear exactly what is driving this. It is the abortion pill. It is now so readily available and so widespread in its use. It's prolific, in fact. It's the number one form of abortion in this country now. And if you have a look at this table here, which is from the very latest abortion report from the Ministry of Health, so it's not been plucked out of thin air, this is their own data, and this table tells us the number of complications at the time of abortion by procedure type, and it lists 3 different types: EMA, which is early medical abortion, which is the abortion pill; surgical, which is number 2, and later medical abortion. And when you look at this chart, it is very clear, it is explicit where this massive increase, this almost doubling in the number of abortions ending in adverse outcomes for women, what's causing it? What's driving it? It's clearly the abortion pill. When you look at, for example, retained placenta/products, what they're talking about there is after the abortion. When they say products, they mean human remains. So the placenta or parts of the baby have remained behind. That happened in 25 surgical abortions. It happened in 24 later medical abortions, and it happened in 135 abortion pill abortions. Infection happened 3 times with surgical, 0 times with later medical, 67 times with early medical abortion. Retained placenta/products and infection, so that's human remains, the placenta, and an infection as well. 22 cases with the abortion pill, 0 for surgical, 0 for later medical abortion. You can quite clearly see here what is driving this increased risk for women. So you would think if in this article they really are interested in doing their best for women and they really are the watchdog as they claim to be, why would they not be focused on this? Why would they not be interested in addressing this, particularly because the Ministry of Health has basically just printed this data and this fact about this massive increase, almost doubling in the number of adverse effects for women from abortion, and they haven't said a word about it either. No one is talking about this. And again, if the Ministry of Health has been ideologically compromised by ALRANZ, which is what they've claimed in this article, remember, they're claiming that they have power over them. So what else do they have power over? Are they having an influence in how reports are being published, what's being talked about, what's being said, the way the data is being presented? I don't think that's an unreasonable question. But if they are truly committed to women's well-being, as they claim, then why would they not be focused on this issue? Surely, if they really are interested in choice, if they're interested in women, and they are the reliable source that they are claiming to be, and they are concerned about things that are dangerous and misleading, etc., why wouldn't they be talking about this particular issue? And the reason I raise this is because surely this raises very big questions about their reliability and their motivations as an organisation. As you can see from this article, they are not a reliable source of information, but frighteningly, and this is why I've chosen to cover this particular article, this article is being propagated and spread amongst healthcare workers in this country uncritically, and there is no discernment, there is no proper pushback, there is no correcting of the misinformation. This is misinformation that is being pumped into healthcare workers in this country. None of this is good. This is the reality of the culture that we find ourselves living in here in New Zealand in 2025. Don't forget to be a voice for the alternative. And as I always like to remind people, live not by lies. We might not be able to push back against the activist institutional juggernaut when you've got an extreme reactionary revolutionary group that is admitting they have control of the power of the state and they are using it punitively against people they dislike. When that's going on, we really are the underdog, but we're not powerless. We still have a choice. We still have the ability to live the truth and reject the lie. And by the way, while you're at it, if you haven't already done so, why not volunteer some hours or make a financial contribution to your local crisis pregnancy centre if they need that kind of support? Every little bit, every contribution is helping to save lives and give women care and genuine alternatives that they are not getting in other places, and that's a good thing. Let's be proud of that. Let's own it. If they're going to call us fundamentalists for doing that, then hey, welcome to the party, because this is a beautiful, beautiful culture that I would much rather live in, and I would much rather be responsible for contributing to than the alternative. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, live by goodness, truth, and beauty, not by lies. And I'll see you next time on The Dispatches.